can remember on 2 occasions taking classes to the studio. I don't think you were aware of it, but there were 20 or 30 of us there one day. And the first time we came in was just after Bob had arrived in town. They said, this is where Crane does his show. And there was a pair of snare drum brushes and a record album. I guess that's what he drummed on. I never could figure out what he was hitting with these brushes. And they said, this is Bob Crane, and a very serious, intent young man said, how do you do, in a very polite way, and that was it. We came back sometime later and watched him do the show. This is probably 2 years later, and we're mightily impressed again with the singleness of purpose of this guy, and of his tremendous sense of organization amidst seeming chaos. He's probably the epitome of what we might call the gimmick disc jockey. So without further ado, may I present Bob Crane.
Let me say it's my pleasure being here.
I don't remember you, truthfully. First off, let me borrow somebody's pen. Lily, may I borrow yours? A pencil? All right, fine. I want to get all your names. First off, may I have your name, sir?
Ed Williams.
Ed Williams. I'm miserable on names. Let me just copy this down here. I got my own name on this sheet here. I am Bob Crane, and I do the morning show on KNX CBS Radio in Hollywood. Now, copy down the name here for a reason. We're going to horse around in just a minute. For those of you who have never heard the show, and in describing it as a disc jockey show or as describing it as anything is pretty rough because we do so much of everything else. The music is not, and here again I am talking as though some of you have not heard the show, of which usually when I go out to speak to a group this size of maybe, 60 people, 50, I'm miserable on counting too. About 45 haven't heard the show, so I would have to explain to them what we do. We use the music as a device, really. It's not that type of station like a KFWB or a KRLA or a KMPC for that matter. The music is there to bridge the commercials and the kidding around, but we don't pride ourselves on picking the pick hit of the day or the week, which some of you may end up doing, and which will be grand, and you'll probably make a lot of money doing it. That isn't my particular device. We just like to have a lot of fun with sponsors and their products and kidding around. And we have guests in on the show, famous celebrity guests every day, who we con into coming in to promote records or movies or plays. We don't pay the guests to come in. I am paid, and I must admit, quite handsomely. I started in this business back in 1950. I started in a very small station up in Hornell, New York. It was a farm area, and they were the only place that would take a chance on a guy who had a miserable voice. At that time, my voice was cracking. It didn't stop until last week, in fact. So don't fear. In the 13 years I've been in the business, this is just to throw one line at you to give you an idea what this business can hold for you. I started at $37.50 a week up in Hornell. It's a small town about 60 miles from Rochester, about 90 miles from Buffalo, New York. I am originally from Stamford, Connecticut. I couldn't get a job in my hometown. They wouldn't hire anybody without any experience. I was playing with bands at the time. I'll be quite honest with you. I was playing in burlesque. I was playing the drums. There are a lot of you guys that may want to go play in burlesque, but I was playing drums. At that time, I was also in the Connecticut Symphony Orchestra, so I went from one end of the stick to the other. I saw some of the most beautiful clarinet players and the most beautiful strippers in the world, but that's neither here nor there. I was around comedy so much, being a musician, I felt maybe there might be something in radio for me. I wanted to be close to music, too. So that was when I started auditioning. I auditioned for 3.5 years. And during that time, I was thrown out of some of the best stations in the East. They all told me the same thing: forget it. They would throw such terrible lines, and some of you, if you have already gone through this horrible experience of walking in completely without any experience, without knowing who you're talking to, and also being at the point where your voice is changing, it's a terrible thing to have the person interviewing you tell you that the fellow sweeping the floor has a better voice. And my main claim to fame then wasn't going to be that I had a great voice. I knew I didn't, but I felt that I could add something, my knowledge of music and my comedy sense. And finally one day, after 3.5 years of trying to get into the business, and I worked nights as a musician, they hired me up in Hornell, New York. And as I said, it was a small town. After I was there 3 months, I found out why they hired me. It seemed that everybody that had applied for this particular job was from New York City. I was the only one out of 50 people that applied that was from a small town. I was from Stamford, Connecticut, which is like 75,000 people at that time. This is a town of 18,000 that I went to. They said they didn't want anybody from a big city. They felt that the fellow wouldn't be happy there. So they hired me strictly on the strength that I was from a small town. I had no experience, a miserable voice, but they felt I was a small town boy. And that's how I got in the business. I was there a year, and after I got there, they fired everybody. Not because I was there, but because they had a whole revamping of the staff. Suddenly, I was asked to do farm reports. I was asked to do newscasts. And I could tell you some of the mistakes I made on the air, but this is a mixed class. And I don't want to close the college. But when I made mistakes, I made them big. I wasn't halfway about it. I came out with words that should never be used anywhere. But the people thought I was funny. To show you the kind of people that lived up in Hornell, New York. It was a farm area, and they figured I was close to the soil. They figured this kid's dirty. And after about a year, my wife was pregnant, which is none of your business, really. And being away for a year at the time, I was wondering, was that even my business? But I figured I'd better come home, closer to home. There's too much going on at home to be up in Hornell, New York. No, my wife was still living in Stamford, Connecticut, and we used to so there won't be any questions afterwards, we used to see each other 3 months. Every 3 months, I would go down to see her, or she would come up to see me. Anyway, I finally got a job in Bristol, Connecticut, which was very close to Stamford. It was like 60 miles from Stamford, Connecticut. And here again, I was hired, and about a week after I was hired, they made me program director. They fired everybody again. I had an adverse effect. I was sort of the guy in Little Abner, the guy with the cloud around his head. Everywhere I went, people got fired. And they made me program director, and also they told me that they thought my comedy sense was very good, but they didn't think I had too good a voice. And I said, well, what did you hire me on? And they said, well, you sent us a wire recording. There wasn't tape at that time. This is 1951. Tape wasn't like it is today. Everybody uses tape now. Everybody was using wire then. Well, it seemed that the machine I recorded my audition on, I recorded a newscast on, played back slow when they got it. So here again, I'm not kidding, my voice was changing. My voice was somewhere up around here. Hi there, this is Bob Crane from Hornell, New York. But they played it back in Bristol slower, and it came, hello there, this is Bob Crane. And they figured do you want to come in, dear? They figured for like $45 a week, we're not going to quibble, because this guy sounds great. I sound like Edward R. Murrow. And in fact, it's at a slow speed, I used to go, this is the news. And I was very careful about the way I said news, too, because I had always been from the East, and I said things like orange and tomorrow and news. And they told me you say news, like it's N-W-E-W-S, and news, and it's tomorrow, and orange. And I was very careful. I was beautiful. And they hired me, and I became program director, and I soon forgot all about the news and all that other stuff because I was so intent on developing what we now do here, working with voices. And the boss said, I like what you do with the gimmicks. They make a nice effect. You get into commercials cute and whatnot. Then it finally developed that they were looking for a morning man at a station in Bridgeport, Connecticut. I had been in the business about 1.5 years. And in fact, the fellow that was the program director of the Bridgeport station reminds me very much of you, Ed. You look like him and sound like him. His name was Wally Dunlap. And I didn't think it was a funny name until I just said it. Wally taught a course nights at the University of Bridgeport. And he worked at WLIZ during the day in Bridgeport. He was the program director. And he taught this course at night, and that was my first meeting of him. Now, here again, it could happen again. You never know what happens in these courses. I didn't go to college. I was working in a jewelry store during the day as a salesman, mainly because my wife and I got married when she was 18, I was 20. So I had to earn a living. And so thus I would go one night a week to this radio course that Wally taught. That's how I met Wally. And all during the course, he never paid too much attention to me, real nice guy. And I always would correspond with him. I auditioned once for him, and here again he told me, I'm not going to tell you you're not for radio because I'll be the last person to admit it when you get somewhere. So I'll just say that right now, Bob, you don't have the voice. You're not too sure about your pronunciation of classical names, which at that time was a standard announcer's audition. You must know classical names. Now, forget it. For me, anyway, because I still don't know classical names. Lily St. Cyr, names like that. At that time, I was saying Lily St. Cyr, you know, and I was playing in burlesque with her. Anyway, I kept correspondence. While I was up in Hornell, I would write to Wally every couple of months to tell him how I was doing. I felt he might be interested, and he really was. It surprised me that he was. I went to Bristol, became program director. He was in Bridgeport, still teaching one night a week, still as the program director. One day on my way down to Stamford, Connecticut, I had to go through Bridgeport. I stopped off to see him, and he said, you're program director up in Bristol making $55 a week. Would you possibly come across anybody who's a morning man, because our morning man was just fired. And I said, why? And he says, he was a boozer. He said, we've had about 5 or 6 morning men here who, for one reason or another, seem to hit the bottle. There must be something about our business. And I since found out that it's not the business, it's the individual. That we don't have a boozer at the station here. In fact, nobody drinks there. It's a ridiculous station. Now I drink. But I didn't drink, and I still don't. And he said to me, if you find a morning man who doesn't drink, we'd like to audition him. I said, what about me, Wally? Now, I studied under you, and I have been doing the morning show. I do gimmicks one night. He said, all right, fine, Bob. Let's hear an audition. I sent him an audition. He hired me. Here it again 2 months later. He said, you've really come along with the guy. You know, everything's progressing. I'll be honest with you, Bob. I didn't hire you out of friendship. I hired you out of the one fact. You didn't drink. He said, your voice wasn't that good. Your news was terrible. So he got me off the news. Now I'm in the business 2 years. He said, you shouldn't be doing newscasts. For one thing, you laugh too much. He said, the other day I heard you doing a thing about some guy's wife found him messing around and she hit him over the head with a 2x4. And almost killed the guy. And you laughed. It was the 12 noon news, too, which everybody listened to, including the boss. And he says, you really chuckled it up good. And he says, I found myself laughing. And he says, and later on, a lot of other people said, hey, that's a funny newscast. He says, we had a meeting with the sales department and the manager of the station and myself. How would you like to not do newscast? In fact, we're going to open up a UHF television station, which we were one of the first UHF television stations. We were Channel 43. He said, I am going to become the program director of the UHF station. We would like to make you program director of the AM station and also the morning man. You won't have to do anything else. Just be program director and do the morning 4 hours. So I said, great. And that's how I got to do it. From then on, I look upon it as child's play now, because it really was. I didn't have a shift. I didn't have a 6-hour shift. No station breaks, nothing. They had somebody come in and do the station break. Suddenly I became a personality, or what they considered a personality. And I listen to those tapes now and I think, oh boy. In fact, I still have the original record that I sent to Hornell, New York, that they hired me on the strength of, which is a classic in itself. I recorded it in my bedroom, which a lot of you may have already done, recorded in bedrooms, or recorded in your bedroom. On this one picture, I did newscast, and I did a record show, which was terrible. Now, I think it's terrible. At that time, it got me the job, so you never know how. You may think yourself, oh, this isn't like the guy on the station I hear in the morning or the guy I hear in the afternoon. But it could be on the strength of that. They may find something in it that could get you a job. Anyway, I now became morning man. I had this thing, and I was there about 6 years in Bridgeport, progressively learning more, learning while I was earning, which is the nice way to do it. And meantime, my pay went from the 55 I had started at, well now, here, and I don't want to confuse you because I get wrapped up in 8 million thoughts, but I started in 1950 at $37.50 a week. I went from there to 45 a week, and let me also explain this too. I was still playing drums nights, 3 nights a week, and I made $11 a night, so that's how I was able to have a wife and eventually a child. Now we've got 3 children. The more money I make, the more kids we have. So my wife has already said, stop earning. No, so anyway, I went from the $37.50 to $45 to $55, then to $75 when they made me program director. Then, after about a year of that, they were paying me a flat salary plus so much a spot, like 25 cents a commercial, 50 cents a commercial. The bookkeeper was going out of her head because the station suddenly had become a big thing. Radio, this is back in 52, 53. They now raised me. They said the bookkeeper was going out of her mind. They would raise me to $175 a week, just so she wouldn't have to worry. They'd give me a flat $175. Then all of a sudden, I started getting offers because other stations could hear me. I was in Bridgeport, and we were heard in New York. It was only 60 miles from New York City. And different agency people would hear me, and they recommended me to jobs. And now the boss said, we'll pay you $250 a week. And then it went to $300 a week. And now I'd only been in the business about 4 years then. And the sky was really the limit then, mainly because I was and here again, it was like I explained to you, that was the truth. I got each one of these jobs at the right time. They got rid of everybody, or I didn't drink, or the tape played, so the weirdest things. But here now, suddenly I was making $300 a week. And it was in 1954, I had a chance to go to Boston. WEEI in Boston offered me $700 a week to go because they had heard I could do 10 commercials in 10 minutes. And the only way I could do it is kidding around. So those of you who have heard the show know we use voices. If you haven't heard the show, this is how we do the commercials. So that's why I said the music was a minor part of the show. It was what I could do with commercials and the kidding around they liked. I had to turn that down because the boss came to me and said, if you stay, we'll pay you $500 a week to stay in Bridgeport. So I said, fine. He said, one of these days you're going to leave. There'll be a good offer. And he said, we won't hold you back. So this is really the limit. We've never paid anybody that much money in this town. So it was in 1956 that somebody wrote an article about me in a national magazine. It was a national trade publication called Sponsor Magazine. The gentleman that wrote it was the vice president of BBD, in New York, one of the big agencies. He listened to me. He lived in Westport. He used to listen on his way to the railroad station every morning. He wrote an article about how I could do all these commercials and make them amusing. They read the article out here on the coast. Meantime, I had gotten offers from Cleveland, Baltimore, the Boston offer I turned down. I had received, without sounding like I'm standing up here bragging, but at a point you reach reputation if you're doing things right, where enough people know about you that the word gets around. There's a guy up in Bridgeport that can do such and such. Now I was getting offers like every day, and it really got to that point. And now I wasn't being smug about it, but I had a goal. I wanted to get to New York. I wanted to be on a big New York station. I listened to WNEW in New York and WCBS, and that was my goal. All of a sudden comes a phone call out of the phone. This guy says, this is Bob Sutton at CBS Radio in Hollywood. How would you like to do the morning show out here? And I took a deep breath and I said, let me think it over, yes. And then I said, how much are you offering? I was going to be a big deal about it because I didn't have an agent or anything. And up until now, I was really turning down good offers because I had that goal. And nobody called me from New York. They didn't know me yet. They still don't. He said Ralph Story is leaving to go back east to do the crooked $64,000 challenge. Which he really didn't know was crooked. We kid him about that now because Ralph is back at the station, or at least he was until a couple of months ago. By the way, he did not leave because of that. He took a trip around the world. He's taking a trip around the world, rather. But anyway, they said, we would like to have you come out, and they offered me $500 a week. And I said, I'm making that already. I've already turned down $700, and I am only explaining money now to you to give you an idea what the goal can be. And believe me, at that time, and still to this day, and it's like somebody once said about Danny Thomas. Danny Thomas can sit back and very smugly say, I'm not interested in money, because he makes $10,000 a week. I'm not making $10,000 a week, but I can sit back now and truthfully and honestly say all along the line, the money didn't count. The $37.50 a week, I could make money drumming. When I made $55, it didn't make any difference. $75, when the boss came and said, we're going to pay you $500, I really didn't care, but I'm not going to tell him. I was just so interested in what I was doing. I would work from 6 o'clock in the morning till 12 midnight, really, just because I loved my job. And when I became program director, I used to do a television show at night on the UHF station, and I'd do the morning show, and I'd also fill in if one of the guys was sick. I'd do the afternoon show, and I'd just give me a mic. I was that much of a ham. Just let me go on. I don't care. The television show I did for nothing because I was program director of the radio station. They said, you can do a television show. And we came up with weird things every night. This is back 1954, 55. UHF television, nobody was watching. Yet I would go out and knock myself out. We used the Snyder telescriptions at that time. They were like a record, but they were a movie of the guy doing it. Nat Cole, for instance, singing Mona Lisa was popular at that time. We played Nat Cole's Mona Lisa every night on the show because we'd had only 5 or 6 of these things to put in. And they bridged the comedy stuff. And we had horses come in, horses that would count for us, and we had a guy come up. Now it's a gag we use on the show, but it's true. This guy really came up, and he said, "Go ahead. What's 2 and 2?" And the horse would go, and then the guy would say, "Okay, come on, boy, one more." And weird things like that. We had a guy, this same guy also did impersonations. He did Ronald Colman in Lost Horizons. And the great H.B. Warner, who was a great actor of yesterday, in fact, quite a few years ago. And Ronald Colman, and he would do this, great High Lama, here in this Shangri-La. You are an old man. If I take you out of this land, you will suddenly become ancient. I know it will happen. You are young now. By the way, how old are you? And H.B. Warner went, the guy just couldn't forget his other routine. Anyway, we did that, and finally the job came up out here, and I came out here for a lot of money, like a ridiculous amount of money, and a 5-year contract that forbid me to do anything else. Actually, I didn't know the contract forbid me to do anything else. What it was is there was a clause in the contract. It was the first clause right at the beginning of the contract that forbid me to read the rest. And so for 5 years, I had offers to do other things, the emceeing of shows for what, and at that time I really was interested in going that route. To describe the route I'm talking about is the Steve Allen, Johnny Carson, Art Linkletter route of going from what I do on radio to being an MC. And for a while I did think of the thought, maybe I would like to do that. And like I said, I was making very good money and didn't have to worry, but my contract forbid me to do these other things. Now I'm thankful because I don't want to do that particular thing. Now what I'm saying now is what I am doing now and what I started out doing, along the line your goals change. I wanted to get to New York. I never did. I would never go to New York now. This is the last thing in the world because I got the job out here. But after I got out here, I suddenly found myself, you are in this position where you're on a major station, a 50,000-watt CBS station in Hollywood. You're trying to get your show on the road, and believe me, against all obstacles, a lot of the salesmen were against the way I worked the show when I first started. And this you'll run into. You'll run into program directors if you get into this business. You'll run into program directors who you think at the time are completely out of their minds. Oh, the guy is a nut. Who eventually you'll realize, and I know it sounds corny, but you'll think back, he was right. He was right at the time. There's a certain something like my son says to me now, he's 11 years old and going to school, why do I have to do all this homework every night? And I said, because you're learning how to study. Not that you're going to remember this, whatever, I hope you remember and digest what you're reading, but it's the idea of learning. And I had all these program directors along the line who would say to me, Bob, you did such and such on the show today, don't do it. Don't ever do it again. If you're ever in doubt, if you think something is a little bit off color, you're debating it. If you have to debate it, then don't do it. If it's reached that point where you're thinking, should I say that, then don't say it, because you're going to offend somebody. If you've got to think about it, then they're going to think about it. They're going to hear it at home and say, We run a very narrow line. Believe me, there are many times somebody will go, why do you say that? Now, usually that happens when I have a guest on. Many times the guest will say things that they're not supposed to say. For instance, I had Julie Stein on the show. Julie Stein has composed so many great Broadway shows and a great man in the industry. An enthusiastic person, much the same as I am. He's talking along one day on the air and he says, Bob, boy, I love what you're doing there with the voices and by the way, I run my own turntables, which is very unusual. I'll tell you about that in a minute. I love what you're doing there. You do a great show. And I'm sitting back with the Jack Parr instant humble routine, letting him talk. Whereas normally I'm trying to get them to, keep it going, like don't drag me with these long lines. But he's telling me how great I am. And I'm sitting there and saying, thanks you, Julie. Gee, you did Gypsy. That's one of your shows. Boy, that's great. You know, go, keep going, Julie. And he's telling me, you're beautiful, Bob. You should be in movies, should be in television, should be a big star. Go, boy, go. And he's going on, and I'm listening. After about a minute and a half, I suddenly began getting bored listening how great I was. So I went to interrupt him. I said, by the way, Julie, and just at that moment, he got bored and suddenly said, hey, may I plug a concert I'm doing here in town? And I said, Julie, can you hold it a minute? I want to do a commercial. And he says, all I want to do is plug the concert. And I said, look, I got a commercial. He says, go to hell. We went to the commercial because there wasn't anything I could do after he said it. You know, the Lillet came out, and it was beautiful. And he, you know, here's this build-up. It was beautiful. Bing, 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 bang. And suddenly we go to commercial. Everybody said to me afterwards, wow, what a funny line. And on Saturday, we repeat our interviews. On Saturday, we had a heck of a job changing that hell to heck. We had to find somewhere in the interview where he used a word that ended with a k sound. So we took that k out of there and stuck it up with, took out the L part of it, stuck up. So on Saturday, he says, go to heck. And nobody laughed. Wrecked the whole joke. But that's the sort of stuff we do. Now, and getting back to my original thing here, I want to tell you. Now, that's how I got started in this business, the whole long history of what I'm doing. The voices I've been doing now ever since I got in the business. Originally, I started out the simplest gimmick that I used, and not that any of you are going to end up doing gimmicks necessarily, but I was using a little salt shaker that I filled with water, and we had Borden's as a sponsor. This was up in Hornell, New York. And I would take a glass in the salt shaker, and I'd say, Borden's guarantees fresh milk. And I'd say, go ahead now, Bessie. Or no, I think it was Elsie, the cow. And I would use the salt shaker as a sound effect with the water coming out, going into the glass. And I'd make believe I was milking the cow. And how fresh can the milk be? And then I found another sound effect, also with Borden's, where there was it was on an old Abbott and Costello kids record, where they did a takeoff on the Giant and what is the one where the Beanstalk, Jack and the Beanstalk. He gets up there, and on their record, the Giant is saying to the goose that lays the golden egg, another, and you hear, and it hits the pail, and he goes, another, and he says, another. Well, I took that sound effect out, and we used it for the Borden's thing. So here again, I said, not only is the milk fresh, and then I'd start at the record, but I said, the eggs are fresh. They're being laid right now. And you'd hear, and meanwhile, and once in a while, we'd hold the drop part of it. And that used to gas people, because I wouldn't say anything. You'd hear, and I'd keep on going, and everybody was waiting for the drop, you know. And I'd say, go ahead, and you'd hear plunk, and then another, and this is how I got into the gimmicks thing. Then finally I decided I could do it with sound effects, why not voices? Then I started adding voices. And this, like I say, is back 13 years ago. And as I went along in the business, my mother one day, I had an old Wilcox Recordio, these gay Recordios things, which is an odd name in itself, and I made a disc of my mother laughing, and I used that as a gimmick. And that went pretty well, because my mother's got a silly laugh, because she's a silly mother. And on I would keep on adding sound effects, and after 13 years now, I've got a closet at CBS there. I don't know whether you saw it, Ed, when you were there. I've got a closet that must be filled with at least 500 albums that may only have one line in there that I use, but I save those albums. I've got some of the original things, gimmicks I use. I keep on adding gimmicks all the time. From our interviews, many times we get gimmicks. Now, just as a demonstration here today, now this is on tape. On the air, I use turntables. I have 4 turntables. My engineer has 4 turntables and 2 tape machines. We don't use tape on the air. It's all live, it's all ad-lib, none of it is rehearsed, none of it is planned. I'm making this whole thing up as I go along, the same as I'm going to do in just a minute here. And the only way we can do that is because around me, besides the 4 turntables, I've got my drums here, which I still drum. I drum on the air kidding around. And until a year and a half ago, in fact, I had my own band. We used to play out, excuse the expression, at UCLA. And then one night I got dragged. I was thinking, what am I doing here at 11 o'clock at night playing for a dance? I should be home in bed. So that's when I gave up the band business, but I still drum on the air. But anyway, with the 4 turntables and the drums. I wear a neck mic similar to this. I have earphones on. I am surrounded by voice records. I've got 2 or 3 different racks just loaded with records that were originally on tape, now on records. I think of something, I think of a line I want to use, I reach up and grab the record, I cue it up myself. So thus I can do it within 2 seconds. I can find what I want because I've been doing it so long now. It's second nature to me. I cue with my feet. It's a custom-made board that actually was designed in Bridgeport, Connecticut by the manager of the station who was an engineer. And thank goodness, because this happens very seldom in this business, when it comes time to building new equipment for announcers, they'll go ask the engineers what the engineers want. It's the announcers that have to use the board, to work the controls, but they'll ask an engineer. This boss, thank goodness, came to me and said, what would you, as our program director and an announcer, like to see? And I said, I'd love to be able to cue with my feet. I said, step on something and be able to hear it. I'd love to throw a switch and be able to hear the turntable while I'm still talking on the air. He said, you'll have that. I said, I want to have a meter of my own, not for the cueing, but to see just how loud I am. In case someday we have engineers, which now I have an engineer, I can still tell how loud I am because the voice gimmick has to be the right level. If it's the wrong level, it'll sound phony. If it's scratchy, it'll sound phony. There are a lot of little things involved. Anyway, they made the custom job. When I came out here and started doing this show, I said to them, please let me work my own turntables. The union had to give me a special waiver to do what I do. At first they didn't want to. Then I proved to them that I make it up as I go along. They didn't believe that. They said, you got to plan it. You can't be doing all this crazy stuff and thinking it up as you go along. I said, yes, I am. They gave me the waiver to work my own turntables. In the waiver it says we cannot mention this on the air that I'm working them. So thus on the air I blame my engineer. I say, Jack Chapman, cut it out. But I'm actually doing it myself. He is meantime playing the commercials and the music on the show. This is how it's done. He doesn't know what I'm going to do next. I've got 2 signals. Well, I've got a bunch of signals, actually, but 2 major ones, cut and go. That's all he knows. He just sits up there waiting. He's got 2 commercials queued up, 2 records queued up. He doesn't know what I'm going to do next, and really I don't. I'm just going along. All of a sudden I decide, like, for instance, the go-to-heck line that Julie Stein used. Jack was all set. He had his hand on the turntable. I didn't know when Julie was going to say that. I didn't know he was going to say it. I'm constantly looking for punchlines as we're on the air. When he came out with that line, right away the light went on in my head. What a punchline. Zoom, I went zack, and out comes the commercial. Jack goes ahead. Anybody hearing it said, oh, they had to plan it. And nothing is planned. That's the whole show is done that way. When I come in at 6:10 in the morning, actually the show starts 6:05, but I'm never on time. And please don't take that as gospel, because in my particular case, I just can't get up that 5 minutes earlier, but most stations would fire you. They think it's cute. That's the way CBS is. It's very cute. You come in all out of breath every morning. Actually, I live in Tarzana, and I have 3 children, and with trying to lead 2 lives here with a family, and I'm in the acting end of this business now, which I never got to before. Why I don't want to be the MC thing. Because right now we did a Donna Reed Show 2 weeks ago, and we may be a regular on the show now. I may be. I keep on using the editorial we because it sounds less conceited. Which, here's another device you can all use. You will, because you'll find out after a while listeners stop, rather they tire of hearing you talk about yourself. So to get over that hump, I have to say, instead of I am doing this, I am doing that, I say we are doing it. So then one day I say, we are the father of a baby. And we got letters. People say, okay, Charlie, explain that one. You're so used to saying this editorial we. But in the acting end of it now, I'm in the comedy end of it. I'm doing the Donna Reed Show next week. I'm going to be off all next week. And to fill in for me, Bob Newhart's going to be doing the show Monday, and Soupy Sale's going to do it Wednesday, and John Conte is going to do it Tuesday. Johnny Green, the composer, is going to do the show Thursday of next week, and Alan Young of the Mr. Ed Show is going to do the show Friday of next week. Now, these are people we've had on the show who have been listeners since, and they become personal friends. So that's when I had to take off for a week. I said, would you like to do the show? They're going to get paid for it, of course. But this is the advantage working in a town like this. I wouldn't have that in Bridgeport. I take off for a week, they'll have the janitor do the show. Because it's the advantage working in a major town. But this first station I started out with was a 250-watt station. I went to a 1,000-watt station, which was the Bridgeport station. That was only 1,000. And from the 1,000-watt, I went to the 50,000-watt, which is quite a jump, and it has happened to a lot of people. It's a fortunate thing in the right place at the right time. But getting back to the show now, how we do it, I just explained. I've got to copy some names, and I'll do this as quickly as possible because time is running short here, so that I can use your names. May I have your name? Blast out your last name so I'll know. What's your last name? R-A-I-N-O. I'm going to use your names with some voices on here. What is your name, sir? Ron Ross. All right. You're not married, are you?
No.
What is your name?
Bob Budman.
Bob Budman. Is anybody here married? Fella. Is there a fella married here? What's your name? Hal what? Hal Hooker, all right. Hal Hooker. Is there, let me see if I need anything else. Is there anybody here interested in building things? I need all males, by the way, for this. Building houses or things like that. Any of you interested in? Yes, what's your name? Miles what? Drucker? Well, you see how I pronounce these things after I write them down. I can't even read my own writing. You want to be an architect? You're interested. After today, you won't be. May we have your name, sir? Daryl what? I'll just say Daryl. Is there any other Daryl in the class? Everybody will know Daryl. May I have your name, sir?
Al Cadallet.
That's your first name?
Yes.
What's his last name?
Allen.
Allard?
Allen.
Allen. Hal Allen. All right, another, that gentleman's name back there that's holding his hand.
Jeff Petty.
No, you're both holding you're holding hands. We should stop holding hands. What is the fellow that's holding them like this? What is your name? Yes, that's you. Yes.
Jeff Cutting.
Jeff Cutting?
Petty.
Jeff Cutting. All right, now I'm going to be making this up in a minute. I hope it's funny because, like when I do it on the air, if it's not funny, at least I don't see expressions coming back at me. There I do it. If it doesn't get a laugh, who knows? Who's interested in girls? This fella back here, in the gray sweater.
James Burkle.
James what?
Burkle.
Burkle?
Burkle.
Brickle? B-R, wait a minute, B, what is it?
B-R-I-C-K-L-E.
I'm miserable on spelling, believe me, it's terrible. These are great things to be admitting to you. You're going to college and I already got a job and I can't spell. I think I should be there, you should be up there. Is there somebody in the class here who everybody knows? Who is, I'll ask you this, Ed, who is the most energetic, outgoing person you got in class?
How about having Nate Rasumi back there by the...
Nate, what's the last name? Well, everybody knows Nate anyway. Any other Nates in the class? So we don't get fouled up. All right, one more fellow. Let me see somebody that's been smiling all the way through this. The fellow, oh, wait a minute, yeah, the fellow in the booth. What's his name?
John Reed.
John Reeder? John Lewis? All right. Now, for a demonstration here, I put the voices. Let me make sure how loud this thing is. Yeah, I guess you can all hear it. This machine needs fixing, too. I may as well tell you that. Happens to be my own machine. John Reno, for instance, if I was talking about John on the air, I'd mention the fact one of the things he loves so much about this particular college.
There's no light in the men's room.
Ron Ross, I'd like to ask the two most important things, Ron, in your opinion, the two most important things in life.
Chicken fat and booze.
Bob Budman. Now, who was Bob Budman? Bob here is kind of sad because he can't find a girlfriend.
I don't mind so much I can't get a girl, but everybody always says, for every man there's a woman.
Right.
If that's true someplace in this world, some guys walk around with two broads.
Daryl? Who was Daryl? That was Daryl there. I'm going to mention the fact that I couldn't spell your name on the air tomorrow morning, Daryl.
Somebody asked you to open up your mouth. Got to open up that big thing everybody should know, you stupid.
Jeff Cutting. Which one was Jeff? Jeff, I'm going to ask you if Jeff has a philosophy on how to get good marks in school.
You can get more with a kind word
and a gun, then we're just a kind Reed.
Miles Drucker is interested in building things, as you heard him say before. He's helping his next-door neighbor build a house right now.
Hey, Bob.
Yes, Miles.
When you build a house, do you start from the roof down or the foundation up?
So no wonder you're having trouble, Miles. Anybody knows you start from the foundation up. It figures.
Hey, fellas, come on down.
Hal Allen. That's Hal over. Do you have a car? That's great. I had to pick a guy without a car. If he had a car, the choice of his, he wants a car with special lights on it.
2 for turning, 2 for fog, 2 for the money, and 2 for the show.
Right.
There are 12 headlights. 6 are just for daytime.
Right.
The tail lights have been improved, too. When they all go on at once, they spell mother.
Hal Hooker is married, right? Do you have any children? How many? 2. To give you an idea how happily married he is, just this morning when he left the house, he said to his wife, look, when I come home tonight, let's start planning on another child.
And stay out.
James Brickle. James likes girls. He really does.
They were good enough for my father, and they're good enough for me.
Nate, I don't have to tell you who Nate is. Everybody knows Nate.
Oh, well, him. Well, he's got a certain, he's got a talent. No, let's not put it that way. I mean, he's sort of, he's great. He's not great. He's medium. Well, he's got a, you see, when he sort of, you don't listen. You don't even want to be in the, I mean, if anybody, if there's one guy, who?
The gentleman up in the booth, John, whatever his name is, who is probably one of the most smiling, easygoing fellows you ever met.
True. He's smiling and easygoing as you would guess.
And your instructor here, Ed Williams, who I'd like to ask Ed how, teaching a class like this, supervising a group like this, he loves his work. Right, Ed?
I think I'm going to throw up.
That's it. That's the story of the show and how we do it and whatnot. And I guess we run out of time, Ed.
Thanks a million.